Welcome to everybody there. My name's Lee Barrett, I'm from Imaginative Minds. This is Sue Hackman. Sue Hackman is ex-chief advisor for the DFB. And what we're going to do today is we're going to be talking to Sue, and she's going to be giving us her answers regarding management of pupil assessment. So I'm going to just start off with a question, Sue. How do you think climbing frames help schools?
Well, although the government abolished levels, it didn't abolish progress. And my first reaction was that schools and teachers would need ways of tracking the progress of pupils so they could manage it, so they could provide intervention for those pupils who need it, so that they could push on those pupils who'd got on very well. And even more than that, in some ways, I felt school managers needed a way of tracking what was going on over time in classrooms, how teachers were doing as well as how pupils were doing, how subjects were doing, how cohorts were doing. And so the provision of management information was a top priority, particularly in those years that don't have SATs, like year 1, 3, 4, 5. It seemed to me that if I was a senior manager in a school right now, I'd be worrying, where is my management information? And then just as an aside, I have lived through several versions of national curriculum assessment, and I do know that they can fall over because they're unmanageable or cumbersome or too clever. And I wanted to create something that was going to be easy and quick and very manageable for your ordinary classroom teacher. And I thought if it could be done, and it has turned out that it could be done, if it could be a process that was developmental for teachers, I thought that would be a really big plus. And that is why I came to Imaginative Minds as a company, is they have this huge backlog of CPD, top tips for teachers, great ideas written back for teachers, so that if there was an area of practice revealed where pupils were not doing well, your teacher could access immediately some help for that without having to run off on a course, that it was there as part and parcel of the system, and that really appealed to me too. And I think those were the things that I started off with as my, the foundation of
Absolutely, I completely get that because it gives a more sort of complete solution. But one of the things that intrigues me is why are you using frames if levels have been stood down?
Well, levels have gone, but progress hasn't gone. And progress, that is the educational endeavour, isn't it? That children make progress. And the way we do that is by working towards these very ambitious objectives in small steps. That's what teachers plan to teach. Right. And it completely follows, therefore, that assessment should be based on small steps forward, on measuring whether children have achieved those small steps forward, so that if they're not making them, we can immediately get in there and help them up the step. Or indeed, if they're moving very quickly, that we push them on to do the best that they can. I also, Lee, thought that with APP and levels, teachers had got used to that way of doing assessment. And I like the fact that not the assessment itself, but the management of it was similar. Yeah. So it is a method of assessing that teachers would be familiar with. And with so much change, that seemed like a benefit and something to be desirable.
So I can see why you've kept a certain amount of continuity there, but how is climbing frames different from levels?
Well, I suppose what's different is that the curriculum is different, that the content is different. Where we used to have a continuum of levels, we now have the years, the objectives that belong in each year. And whilst we don't want to track children within the objectives for their own year, I think that that's a useful labelling system. We know that the standard has risen by about half a level, and there are some areas that are just significantly different. I'm thinking, for example, of grammar, punctuation and spelling in writing. You just have to really accept that there's a new curriculum and move to a new way of, a new scheme of assessment, even if the method is very similar. So I don't think it's fundamentally different in approach, but it is fundamentally different in content.
Yeah, so we're looking at on the screen here, we can see that these small steps are recognised for teachers to make their judgments.
Yeah.
We'll go through to the next screen. Okay, so these are the expected progresses then that you're talking about.
That's right. I think this is really important about the scheme, that it hinges on the teacher's assessment of how the children is doing against those clusters of objectives in the curriculum. And there are three, in APP in the past, there were 2 sub-levels progress a year. The interesting thing I think about climbing frames is that it has these 3 steps, and even actually it has 4 steps for the child who moves beyond the objectives for the year. But if by Christmas we say, you know, we expect a child to have made a pretty decent start on the objectives, by Easter we're really hoping they've got, you know, most of them under their belt, even if it's not consistent. And in summer, that they'll have pretty much got there with those objectives. That is what we hope for, that children will move through those 3 sub-levels. And what I really liked about this was that it is more sensitive than APP, because there are 3 sub-levels in a year rather than 2. And it's sensitive enough, I think, to pick up changes in pupil progress that are as a result of our own intervention. So, if I was running catch-up, for example, with some pupils, I think this system would actually be sensitive enough to pick up if children were making more than typical progress. So I like its potential for evaluation of our own work, as well as of whether pupils were making the expected rate of progress.
I completely agree with you. I think it's a much better way. One of the things that really does confuse me, if not for want of another word, is what should schools use as a starting point?
This is really difficult, and I do realise that people are asking. We obviously have a rough idea that standards have gone up by half a level, so, and ironically the government have expressed that as saying that the new standard is 4B, and that's the levels they just abolished. But I just do not think you can make that straight translation. If we could, we would. But the challenge is that the curriculum is completely new. There are these new elements in it. Some objectives are taught a year earlier, some are taught a year later, some aren't even taught at all now, and some are new. And so I think it would be misleading to say, just fiddle with the last of the old levels, just do a quick conversion. I'd counsel against that. I think for schools the quickest and easiest thing to do would be if the child's teacher is, previous year's teacher is there, get them to make the quick judgment on the quick assessment facility in climbing frames of how far the child is along the way in English and maths, just saying whether they've started, they're well advanced or they really have conquered the objectives. A quick and dirty assessment from last year's teacher, I think that would be easy to do. If that isn't possible, because last year's teacher isn't there or it's all too late for that, then I think the other thing to do would be to put aside the first half term of the first year and reserve that half term for really getting to know the children and understanding where they are. And you make the first assessment not on the 1st of September, but somewhere towards the end of October as the first half term approaches, and use that as the baseline. If that doesn't appeal, we are working on a set of quick and dirty tests that would tell you, and these are designed for years 1, 3, 4, 5, where you don't have prior information. These are tests of whether they learned the objectives for that year, the exact objectives as they appear in the national curriculum, and would give you a rating for that. Some schools will be happy to do that because it will only take an afternoon, but some will probably, not want to do tests. In which case, I really urge you not just to convert old levels, but to take time to make the assessment.
I'm looking at the screen here, Sue, and what it's saying to me here is that it's asking the teachers to tick boxes. So is climbing frames just a set of tick boxes?
No, that's absolutely not true. That is the last thing it is. Sometimes you tick a box just to register your judgment, but it really, climbing frames is absolutely based on teacher judgments. I believe in that. I don't believe in tick boxes. I think it is a problem with a number of the assessments that are on the market at the moment, that they are just adding up ticks. And I don't believe children learn objectives like that. I don't believe that children learn one objective, tick, and then move on to the next one, tick, and then move on to the next one, tick. I think that children learn objectives and apply them and consolidate them over time. And so I think making that more global judgment of where children are on the objectives is a better way of doing it than just leaving it to a computer to add up ticks. So the answer is an absolute no. It is not a tick box assessment. There is, you'll notice on the screen, there is a facility for ticking when a topic has been covered, but that is for the teacher and for the head teacher to know what has been covered so far this year. That's curriculum tracking, that isn't part of the judgment itself. Some schools really love it and other schools don't use it, but it is a facility that's there.
So that's purely advisory ticking then, as opposed to...
Yeah, and could I also say, Lee, just while we're on that topic, that it's not every single objective in the national curriculum. Not all the objectives are big and important. And our system, to be manageable, to be doable, to be time efficient, it is taking the big, important objectives and putting aside others. So, for example, in maths, you won't be finding Roman numerals assessed in the scheme. You can be a great mathematician without Roman numerals, but the 2 times table, you're going nowhere if you can't double. So the 2 times table is in there.
This sort of leads me on quite nicely, Sue, because I do remember, I'm not sure if you actually said it, or if I remember reading that you saying once that you were complete IT and you hated IT or so.
I better say, I'm over 60. Enough said. I am not an IT geek. Everybody knows this. There's no use lying about it. Email is I can do, but I think that is why I'm a good person to be doing this. We put all our energy, certainly all my energy, into making it a screen and a programme which was completely easy for your amateur teacher. That was me. I need something where I know I'll look at the screen, it's clean, I know what I've got to do, I know what I've got to tick, I know what I've got to decide. I'm really proud of climbing frames because that was the... Shall I tell you that people often say, can we have this, can we have that, can we have the other? You can, if you've got a lot of money and people are willing to pay for it, you can. But my experience of assessment schemes which are huge and do everything is that they're just a bit unmanageable. And I was really insistent that this was a scheme that would be easy to use, it would be quick to use, that your classroom teacher who's worked a long day would be able to do it perhaps on the bus going home, on their phone, on their iPads, you know, in the spare moment in the classroom. It wouldn't be a monstrous system. So I think it's a good thing that I'm not an IT geek. I believe in keeping it simple.
Yes.
Besides, sorry, I keep cutting in, but
no, that's okay.
I wanted it to be user-friendly.
I was just looking at this screen here, and there's some nice sort of colours on there, and I can see that the advanced information. It's like really, it is really visual.
I got sent to New York by Secretary of State a few years ago, and in New York they were using colour coding systems, this traffic light system. They'd originally started using it with parents who didn't have English, his community of Hispanic parents who didn't speak English, and the parents just loved it, and I love it too because it tells me at a glance why this child is doing without me having to decode, every letter. This is a child, and this is how they're doing in different subjects. And I don't even have to lean too far to the computer to know this child is doing well in art and design. I can see the green. I can see a red alert there next to history and against music. I know I've got 2 problems. This assessment is taken at just before Christmas. So actually, I can be quite happy with the yellows and oranges. I think this child is where they'd expect. I'm thrilled about art. But I know where I'm focusing my energies. And I really like, that's another thing you can do on computer, you see, that's harder on paper. You can do the colour coding, and parents are loving getting that kind of coloured information when it goes home.
So I can see how this can save an awful lot of time for teachers, and I can see how it's a lot of information in there. But does that mean that the app does everything for me?
The app doesn't do everything for you. It does provide something instant and automatic, but it isn't the judgment.
Right.
Teachers still own assessment, and it will be a very, very bad day for us when computers take over assessment. What it does do rapidly is it gives this kind of management information really swiftly and automatically. All the manager has to do to the machine is say, tell me what's on there at the moment. Do you know what I think, Lee, is I think over time we'll see that assessment is moving away from big set piece end of term, tell me how the children are doing, to ongoing assessment. It'll be closer to classroom assessment. In other words, real-time assessment. On the day Ofsted arrive, if you're using climbing frames, you could show a screen like this to show how children, this for example is, I think this is a science one, isn't it? It's showing how the children in my class are doing on science and the distribution of their performance. Do we have another screen with the progress on?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, this is a same class, same subject, but here it's showing how many levels of progress children have made since the beginning of the year. And we can be really happy when we look at that. We can see how many have made 3 steps, which is like what you hope for from a whole year. And some have gone beyond. So that would tell me a lot about the class. If I was a senior manager, I might be looking down there at the 1 and 2, 0 and 1 levels of progress and saying, who are those children?
Yeah.
So it's instant management information, I think, is the great pleasure, because right now, without levels, unless you've got a scheme like this, you just don't have the management information. It's the big weakness of the government's new assessment regime, I think.
That's really good, and there's lots of this. I like the way that progress is there and attainment. Because for me, progress is really a key area.
And the accountability system now, of course, progress is bigger.
So you're telling me that climbing frames is inclusive for all children?
It is inclusive for all children. It was built to be that way. There was a challenge, I thought, for children with special needs who were performing below national curriculum levels, because when levels went up, there was a shortfall between P scales and national curriculum levels. And so we designed some pre-levels. You can see there, that's on the screen now, that there is an equivalence between P levels and pre-levels. The pre-levels are bigger than P levels, and that was so that a pre-level was roughly the equivalent of a mainstream level. If I was a head teacher, I would be measuring levels of progress, including these. These would count in my system. It wouldn't be, I think this has been the problem for me with P scales, is that P scales have operated as a completely separate system. In climbing frames, you can measure progress of children who are coming off pre-levels and international curriculum levels. And as a head teacher, I thought that was an attractive idea, that it gives them equal status. I think it's too easy to neglect special needs children who are outside that. We created some frames, and again, this was inspired by the company Imaginative Minds, who do a great deal of work on thinking and learning skills and creativity, of having some frames or ladders that were based on cross-curricular skills. So you can see that seeking and keeping ideas isn't restricted to English or history or maths. That cuts across a number of subjects, as to say, thinking critically. I do think there might be some schools who'd be interested in using these instead of doing individual foundation subject assessments, although they can do that. Climbing Frames does have modest assessment frames for all the subjects, and for the child who's brilliant at art but not so brilliant at maths, I like the idea that they get credited for that and recognised for that. And as a parent, I always wanted to know how my child was doing on, well, you know, music and history and geography, all those other things. They've got very sidelined by this intense focus of the government on a very narrow band, actually, of number and grammar. And I wanted somewhere to keep recognition of everything that a child is, of the child in the round. Incidentally, our climbing frames also includes Key Stage 3. It also is about to include early years foundation stage. The work is done, that is going to go on shortly. So when you ask, is it inclusive? It is inclusive, and it's inclusive not just of SEN, it's inclusive of the able who are going to push on, of the secondary, of those who come before, of all the subjects. And it was intended to be that way, to be an embracing assessment system rather than this rather narrow one that the government has settled on.
So we're looking at climbing frames. It's looking like a really good, easy to use system. That's fantastic, but we've had Ofsted, we've had the commission, the report. Is this compliant for the government expectations?
I think it's completely compliant with Ofsted. I very much supported what Ofsted had written about assessment. I think they want a system that delivers on tracking people so you know whether they're on, ahead or behind enough that you can intervene. So I'm very confident about Ofsted. I'm very supportive of the unions actually and what they've written about assessment. I feel this expresses, it's a version that is compatible with that. Now the Working Party didn't choose to direct people to any particular scheme. It said that people should choose their own schemes. I think the big issue for schools is where is your management information coming from, and whether you just settle for everyday good classroom assessment, which you absolutely should do. Nobody in my experience ever argues with that. It's whether you have enough management information as a leader in between times. That for me is the critical deciding point. So yes, it's compatible with the Working Party. I just personally wish the Working Party paid more attention to how managers cope as well as teachers.
Just sort of going on to like how it's evolving and so forth. You spoke earlier about early years foundation and coming on board. Can we expect to see additions like performance descriptors or any other?
You can. The work on performance descriptors is done. We waited to have the exact wording. As it turns out, they're interim ones for 1 year, but they are going to go on. In the climbing frames right now, the performance descriptors are covered, but they're not in the exact wording that the government chose. So what we're going to do is update the wording, and we're also going to put in a facility for just taking an assessment of the performance descriptors in year 2 and year 6 for reading, writing, mathematics and science. Because it was a bit of a surprise to me that the performance descriptors took a very narrow band of skills. It didn't look, for example, at the range of reading or at drafting or the range of writing. It's just gone for quite a narrow range. So we are got the work is done. That is on the list of things for the software company to do. Early years is waiting to go up. A number of people have asked about RE, Lee. The reason RE isn't on there is that every local authority has its own RE syllabus, and they are all different. I have offered, if people want RE, if they tell me what their local area one is, I wouldn't mind having a go at it, and I'm betting quite a lot of them are similar. I'm aware of Church of England work, but not every school is, can you assume, is Church of England. But I'm willing to have a go. In fact, I quite would like to have a go at that. I know that the company would like to look at Key Stage 4, how the skills extend up to Key Stage 4, so that's waiting on my time. I have just completed one thing which was a personal passion. I was very committed in my time working at the DFE to the progress of children who come from impoverished backgrounds. These might be pupils who receive the pupil premium, and how we measure their progress, because it's not always merely academic progress after there. And so I've written some frames. They've got a working title, Poverty Ladders. I'm sure it's a very ungainly title. We'll think of something very slick by the time they publish. But I'd like to publish those so that people are doing work with their free school meal pupils and their disadvantaged pupils, they will have some scales against which to measure pupils. Just to give you a hint, it has things like children's cultural experience, their ability to manage the conventions of language like standard English, their ability in behaviour and working with others. Some of those critical skills that are just different for those kind of children. I had to learn them on my way up, and I was passionate about putting something in for them. If there are any schools listening for whom this is a priority, I'd really like to share my ladders with you and get some feedback on them. I'm at the stage that they're finished. They're not up yet. I'd really love, if anyone out there interested in working with disadvantaged children, I've got an assessment scheme I'd love you to look at.
I did notice that there were some filters on the management reports for pupil premium, free school meals.
You can tag children, yeah.
I think that's really sort of quite useful in their management breakdown. But you spoke very briefly at the start about CPD for staff. Could you just expand a bit more on?
The company that I've been working with on climbing frames have a fantastic history of work with teachers to develop their own professional understanding and their own professional practice, with a very strong emphasis on creativity, on learning itself, on the art of teaching, so that children learn. Can I say that is one of the reasons why I came to a small ethical company rather than going to a big company, is that I wanted this to be a scheme that teachers would want to use because it had those values. And one of the advantages of Imaginative Minds is that they run a huge number of magazines. I think most schools will find that they've got that kind of thing already coming in. But it's got its back catalogue of resources is fantastic. Articles about different ways of teaching, articles on how to teach the hardest to teach elements of the curriculum, which I really admire. When you go online, you can, as it were, bring up those articles, any CPD training questionnaires, and indeed, even on the very top level of the programme, there's a drop-down menu of top tips of ways that you might improve your practice in an area. It gives you just good classroom ideas. This is wonderful because we say of assessment that we want to do assessment for children so that we can give them the means to develop, we can give them the next steps. What I like about climbing frames with Imaginative Minds input is that we can do the same for teachers. That this is there for them to improve as well.
It's massive. There's a lot there. Big question, and I know a lot of head teachers will be sitting there. Sounds brilliant, but how much is this?
Yeah, I think the rough answer is £2 per child, isn't it? Well, everything's expensive now because the budget's going to be tight, and it's going to be tight for the next 4 years. There's no two ways about it. It is an investment, but I think of all the investments, assessment for learning, assessment that really helps children, is worth it. And I am glad that we did it per head, because that means that a small school will be able to afford this. We've tried our best to make this simple and universal and good for all teachers. And the money that we've invested in it is the money to keep it simple and manageable. And so I think if that's a priority for a school, if a teacher says, as long as I can manage it, as long as I don't go home and have to work all evening, if they can say, I made use of this and it made a difference, I think that's the investment that's worth it.
Absolutely. Well, Sue, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
We can take questions, can't we, by email or something. People might have things to ask.
I think what we'll do is we'll, to everybody out there, if you've got any questions for Sue, if you'd like to email them in, we'll send you the contact details of where to email to, and we will collate those and get the answers back to you.
Thank you for joining in after a hard day at work.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah.